In the dust-choked frontier town of Red Hollow, a penniless woman named Evelyn Mercer stepped off the afternoon stagecoach and did the unthinkable. She walked straight up to Wade Granger, the coldest, most feared man in 3 counties, and asked him to marry her. The entire street went silent. What no one knew was that both of them were running from pasts that would soon collide in violence neither could escape. This is their story. If you enjoy it, hit the like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels. The stagecoach rattled into Red Hollow 20 minutes past noon on a Tuesday that felt like any other until it wasn't. Evelyn Mercer climbed down from the coach with nothing but a worn leather satchel, a threadbare coat, and exactly $4.30 in her pocket. Her dress had been mended so many times the original seams were barely visible beneath the newer stitching. She stood on the packed dirt road and looked around at a town that seemed to be holding its breath. Red Hollow wasn't much. A main street flanked by weathered storefronts, a saloon with peeling paint, a general store with a crooked sign, a blacksmith shop where the hammer had gone quiet, and everywhere, dust. It coated the windows, gathered in the corners of doorways, and hung in the air like something waiting to settle, but never quite managing it. Evelyn didn't care about the dust. She cared about survival. She had left St. Louis 3 weeks earlier with a plan that sounded reasonable in her head, but grew thinner with every passing mile. Find work, find shelter, find a way forward that didn't involve crawling back to the cousin who had made it clear she wasn't welcome anymore. But work was scarce. Shelter cost money she didn't have. And the way forward had narrowed to a single desperate option she had been avoiding since the idea first crept into her thoughts somewhere outside of Kansas City. Marriage. Not the kind built on affection or courtship. The practical kind. The kind that kept a roof overhead and food on the table. The kind her mother would have called shameful and her grandmother would have called smart. Evelyn wasn't interested in shame. She was interested in not starving. She had heard about Red Hollow from a woman on the stagecoach 2 stops back. The woman had mentioned it in passing while complaining about her sister's husband, who owned a dry goods store in some godforsaken place where nothing ever happened and nobody ever left. Except for Wade Granger, the woman had said, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret she shouldn't. He's got land out there. Good land, they say. But nobody goes near him. Keeps to himself. Cold as January. My sister says he hasn't spoken more than 10 words to anyone in town since he showed up 5 years ago. Evelyn had tucked that piece of information away without really thinking about it. But now, standing in the middle of Red Hollow with $4 to her name and no place to sleep tonight, she thought about it plenty. A man with land. A man who kept to himself. A man nobody bothered. That sounded exactly like someone who might be practical enough to see the value in a straightforward arrangement. She asked the stagecoach driver where she might find Wade Granger. The driver, a grizzled man with a tobacco-stained beard, looked at her like she had just asked him to point out the nearest rattlesnake den. "You don't want to go looking for Wade Granger, miss." "I didn't ask if I wanted to," Evelyn said. "I asked where I'd find him." The driver spit into the dirt. "Usually comes into town Thursdays for supplies. Sometimes Saturdays. You'll know him when you see him. Tall, dark coat, doesn't talk to nobody." "Today's Tuesday." "Then I guess you'll be waiting." Evelyn thanked him and walked toward the general store. She had 2 days to figure out how to make $4 stretch into meals and a place to sleep, or she'd have to move on to the next town with even less than she had now. The inside of the store smelled like flour and old wood. A thin woman behind the counter looked up when Evelyn entered, her expression somewhere between curious and cautious. "Help you?" "I'm looking for work," Evelyn said. "Anything. Cleaning, mending, cooking. I'm good with numbers if you need help with ledgers." The woman's face softened slightly, but the answer didn't. "Nothing available right now. You might try the saloon. They're sometimes looking for girls to serve drinks." Evelyn had been in enough saloons to know what serving drinks turned into after dark. She nodded politely and left. She tried the blacksmith next, then the livery stable, then the boarding house, where a dour-faced man told her he didn't rent to single women without references. By late afternoon, Evelyn was sitting on a bench outside the general store with her satchel at her feet and the uncomfortable realization that Red Hollow wasn't going to be any kinder than the 6 towns before it. That's when she saw him. He came down the main street on a black horse that looked as unfriendly as its rider. Tall, like the driver had said, Dark coat, hat pulled low enough to shadow most of his face. He didn't look at anyone, and nobody looked directly at him. People stepped aside without appearing to move. Conversations paused mid-sentence and resumed only after he passed. Wade Granger. Evelyn knew it the same way you know a storm's coming before the first drop of rain falls. She stood up. This was the moment where a smarter woman might have reconsidered, might have sat back down and waited for a better option to present itself. But Evelyn had run out of better options somewhere around the Missouri border. She picked up her satchel and walked straight toward him. The street went still. Wade Granger reined his horse to a stop in front of the general store, dismounted with the kind of economy that comes from doing the same motion 1,000 times, and tied the reins to the post. He didn't look at Evelyn as she approached, but she could tell he'd noticed her. There was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there a moment before. She stopped 3 feet away. "Mr. Granger?" He turned his head slowly. His face was harder than she'd expected, not cruel, but worn down by something that had taken more than it left behind. His eyes were dark, unreadable. "I don't know you, sir," he said. "No, you don't." "Then you've got no business with me." "I do, actually." He waited, didn't ask, just waited. Evelyn took a breath and said the words before she could talk herself out of them. "I want to marry you." The silence that followed was so complete she could hear the wind rattling a loose shutter 2 buildings down. Wade Granger stared at her, not with shock, not with confusion, just stared like he was trying to determine whether she was dangerous or just out of her mind. Finally, he said, "You've got the wrong man." "I don't think I do." "You don't know me. I know you have land. I know you're not married. I know you don't have anyone working your place because if you did, people would talk about it. They don't talk about much except how much they'd prefer to avoid you. And you think that makes me a good prospect? I think it makes you a practical one." His expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Not softness, just calculation. "What's your name?" "Evelyn Mercer." "Where are you from?" "St. Louis." "Before that?" "Ohio." "Why are you here?" "Because I'm out of money and out of options, and I don't plan to starve just because I ran out of places that would have me." He studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "You're serious." "Completely." "You know anything about ranch work?" "I can learn." "Cooking?" "Enough to keep us both fed." "And you think I'm just going to agree to this because you walked up and asked?" "I think you're practical too," Evelyn said. "I think you've been out here alone long enough to know that running a place by yourself is harder than it needs to be. I'm offering to work, to pull my weight. I don't need affection. I don't need promises. I just need a roof and food and something that resembles stability." Wade looked past her toward the people pretending not to watch from doorways and windows. "You have any idea what you're asking?" "I know exactly what I'm asking." He turned back to her, and for the first time she saw something that might have been respect. "How soon?" Evelyn blinked. "What?" "How soon can you be ready to marry?" She hadn't expected him to agree. She'd expected him to tell her to get lost, or laugh, or at the very least make her work harder to convince him. "Whenever you say." Wade nodded once. "Day after tomorrow. There's a preacher 2 towns over. We'll ride out in the morning, get it done, and come back before sundown." "Just like that?" "Just like that." He untied his horse, swung back into the saddle, and looked down at her. "Be ready at dawn. My place is 3 miles west. Anyone in town can point you in the right direction." Then he rode off, leaving Evelyn standing in the middle of the street with her satchel and the uncomfortable knowledge that she had just agreed to marry a man whose first name she hadn't even asked. Back. The boarding house man changed his tune when Evelyn mentioned she'd be marrying Wade Granger in 2 days. Suddenly, there was a small room available. No references needed. She paid for 1 night with money she couldn't afford to spend and lay awake on a lumpy mattress wondering what kind of mistake she'd just made. She didn't know Wade Granger, didn't know if he was violent or kind or just indifferent. Didn't know what his ranch looked like or why he'd agreed so quickly to her proposal. Didn't know if she'd made the smartest decision of her life or the worst. But she knew she'd run out of road. And sometimes the only way forward was through a door you couldn't see past. Saratsik. Dawn came cold and gray. Evelyn washed her face in the basin, braided her hair, and put on the only dress she owned that wasn't falling apart at the seams. It wasn't much, but it was clean. She met Wade Granger outside the general store at first light. He was already waiting, sitting on his horse with a second horse tied beside him. "You ride?" he asked. "Well enough." "Well." He dismounted, helped her up onto the smaller horse without ceremony, and climbed back onto his own. They rode out of Red Hollow without another word. The preacher's town was called Dorset, and it wasn't much bigger than Red Hollow. The preacher himself was a wiry man with kind eyes and a habit of clearing his throat before he spoke. "You two sure about this?" he asked, looking between them like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "We're sure," Wade said. The preacher married them in his front room with his wife as a witness. The whole thing took less than 10 minutes. Wade signed the certificate. Evelyn signed below him. The preacher's wife smiled nervously and offered them tea, which Wade declined. They rode back to Red Hollow in silence. When they reached the edge of town, Wade turned his horse west instead of continuing down the main street. "We're not stopping?" Evelyn asked. "Nothing to stop for." He led her off the main road and onto a narrow trail that cut through scrub brush and rocky soil. The land here looked tired, like it had given up trying to grow anything a long time ago. After about 30 minutes, they crested a low hill, and Evelyn saw the ranch for the first time. It wasn't much. A house that had probably been solid once, but now sagged slightly to one side. A barn with gaps in the walls. Fences that leaned at odd angles or had collapsed entirely. A well that looked functional, but barely. And everywhere, dust and weeds and the evidence of neglect. Wade dismounted and tied his horse to a post that looked like it might fall over if you leaned on it too hard. "It's not much," he said, which was the understatement of the year. Evelyn climbed down from her horse and looked around. The house had a porch with 2 broken steps. The windows were intact but filthy. The door hung slightly crooked on its hinges. "It's fixable," she said. Wade looked at her like he was trying to determine if she meant it. "You don't have to lie." "I'm not lying. It's bad, but it's not past saving." He didn't respond to that. Just walked toward the house and pushed the door open. The inside was worse than the outside. One main room that served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting space. A bedroom off to the side. A loft overhead that was probably supposed to be storage, but looked more like a place where things went to die. The furniture was sparse and mismatched. The floor was covered in a layer of grime that suggested Wade's housekeeping skills were about as strong as his people skills. "You take the bedroom," Wade said. "I'll sleep in the loft." Evelyn set her satchel down. "We're married. Doesn't mean we have to pretend it's anything more than what it is." "And what is it?" Wade looked at her with that unreadable expression she was starting to recognize as his default. "An arrangement." "Fine," Evelyn said. "Then I'll take the bedroom." But shit. The first week was strange. Wade left before sunrise every morning and didn't come back until after dark. Evelyn spent her days cleaning the house, which was a task roughly equivalent to bailing out a sinking ship with a teacup. She scrubbed floors, washed windows, patched holes in the walls with whatever materials she could find, and tried to make sense of the kitchen, which had approximately 3 functioning pots and a stove that looked like it might explode if you lit it wrong. Wade didn't talk much. When he came in at night, he ate whatever she'd managed to cook, nodded his thanks, and disappeared up into the loft. Evelyn could hear him moving around up there sometimes, the creak of floorboards and the rustle of blankets. She didn't push, didn't ask questions, didn't try to make conversation he clearly didn't want. But she watched. She noticed the way his hands were always scraped and calloused from work, the way he moved carefully, like someone used to being hurt, the way he never fully relaxed, even in his own house. She noticed the rifle he kept near the door, the way he checked the windows before he went to bed, the way he sometimes stood on the porch at night, staring out at the dark land like he was waiting for something to come over the horizon. By the end of the second week, Evelyn had cleaned the house into something resembling livable. She'd mended the broken porch steps, patched the worst holes in the barn walls, and started working on the garden plot behind the house, which was mostly weeds and rocks but had potential if you squinted hard enough. Wade noticed. He didn't say anything, but she could tell. He started coming back a little earlier in the evenings, started lingering after dinner instead of disappearing immediately, started offering short comments about the work she'd done. "Porch looks better. You got the stove working right. Garden might actually grow something if you keep at it." It wasn't much, but it was something. Subchiket. 3 weeks in, Evelyn finally asked the question that had been sitting in the back of her mind since the day they met. They were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the sun sink below the hills. Wade had his coffee. Evelyn had hers. The silence between them had stopped feeling uncomfortable and started feeling almost companionable. "Why did you agree?" she asked. Wade didn't look at her. "Agree to what?" "To marry me. You didn't know me. I could have been anyone. Could have been dangerous." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You were honest." "That's it?" "Most people out here lie. They tell you what they think you want to hear, or they tell you nothing at all and expect you to figure it out later. You walked up and said exactly what you wanted and exactly what you were offering. That's rare. So you took a chance." "I took a calculated risk." Evelyn sipped her coffee. It was terrible, but she'd gotten used to it. "Can I ask you something else?" Wade's jaw tightened slightly. "Depends on what it is. Why does everyone in town act like you're dangerous?" He set his cup down on the porch railing. For a moment she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "Because it's safer for them to think that." "Safer for who?" "For everyone." He stood up, picked up his cup, and went inside without another word. Evelyn sat on the porch alone and thought about what he hadn't said. A month after the wedding, the first stranger showed up. Evelyn was working in the garden when she heard the horse. She straightened, shaded her eyes, and saw a man riding toward the house. He was older, maybe 50, with a neat coat and a hat that looked too expensive for Red Hollow. Wade came out of the barn, saw the rider, and went still. The man reined his horse to a stop at the edge of the property and tipped his hat. "Wade Granger. Been a long time." Wade didn't move. "Not long enough." The man smiled, but there was nothing friendly in it. "Now, is that any way to greet an old acquaintance?" "We're not acquainted." "Your mother and I were." "That makes us practically family." Evelyn saw Wade's hand move toward the rifle leaning against the barn wall. The man noticed too. His smile widened. "No need for that. I'm just here to talk. Thought you'd want to know that certain debts are coming due. Your mother made some promises before she passed, promises that didn't die with her." "My mother didn't owe you anything." "The courts might see it differently." "There are no courts. There's just you and your lies." The man shrugged. "Lies. Truth. It all comes down to who can prove what, doesn't it? And I've got documents, signatures, witnesses who'll say whatever I tell them to say. Get off my land. I'll go. But I'll be back. And when I come back, I'll expect you to be reasonable about this. Otherwise, things might get complicated for you. For your new wife, too." He tipped his hat toward Evelyn, turned his horse, and rode off at a leisurely pace. Evelyn walked over to where Wade stood, his hand still gripping the rifle. "Who was that?" "Nobody." "Wade." He turned to look at her, and for the first time she saw something close to fear in his eyes. "His name is Silas Boone, and if he's here, it means I'm out of time." That night, Wade told her everything. They sat at the kitchen table with the lamp burning low between them, and he spoke in the flat, careful tone of someone reciting facts they wished weren't true. His mother had owned a small piece of land in Kansas. Nothing fancy, but enough to live on. Silas Boone had been a businessman who loaned money to desperate people and then found creative ways to make sure they could never pay him back. Wade's mother had borrowed money during a bad winter. Boone had buried her in interest and false fees and eventually claimed she owed him 3 times what she'd borrowed. She fought him, Wade said, took it to court, but Boone had judges in his pocket, had clerks who'd forge documents and witnesses who'd swear to anything for a price. She lost the land, lost everything. What happened to her? Wade's face went hard. She died 6 months later. Couldn't take it. I was 16. Old enough to know what Boone had done, but too young to do anything about it. So you left. I ran, changed my name, moved as far west as I could, figured if I kept my head down and stayed out of his way, he'd forget about me eventually. But he didn't. Men like Boone don't forget. They wait. And when they think you've got something worth taking, they come back. Evelyn looked at the man sitting across from her, this man she'd married out of desperation and convenience, and saw someone who'd spent his entire adult life looking over his shoulder. What does he want? This land, the ranch, He'll claim my mother owed him more than he ever collected. He'll say I inherited the debt. He'll produce paperwork that looks legitimate enough to fool anyone who doesn't know better. And then he'll take everything. Can he do that? He's done it before. Evelyn thought about the stranger's smile, the easy confidence, the veiled threat. What are you going to do? Wade looked at her with tired eyes. I don't know. The second time Silas Boone showed up, he wasn't alone. 2 days after the first visit, he rode up to the ranch with 3 men behind him. They didn't look like businessmen. They looked like the kind of men you hired when talking stopped working. Wade was out mending fence. Evelyn was inside kneading dough when she heard the horses. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped outside. Boone tipped his hat again. Mrs. Granger, pleasure to see you again. What do you want? Just checking in. Wanted to give your husband a friendly reminder that time's running short. He's not here. That's fine. You can pass along the message. Tell him I'll be back in 1 week with the paperwork. If he's smart, he'll sign it over peacefully. If he's not, Boone gestured vaguely at the men behind him. Well, these gentlemen here aren't known for their patience. Evelyn crossed her arms. You threaten everyone who comes out here, or just people you think won't fight back? Boone's smile thinned. Careful, Mrs. Granger. You're new to this situation. You don't know how things work yet. I know a con when I see one. One of the men behind Boone shifted in his saddle. Boone held up a hand. I like you, he said. You've got spirit, but spirit doesn't pay debts. Tell your husband what I said. He turned his horse and rode off with his men trailing behind. Wade came back an hour later and found Evelyn sitting on the porch steps with her arms wrapped around her knees. He came back, she said. Wade didn't ask who. He just sat down beside her. What did he say? That he'll be back in a week with paperwork. That if you don't sign, his men will make sure you do. Wade nodded slowly. Then I've got a week to figure out what to do. Or, Evelyn said, we could fight him. Wade looked at her. We. I'm your wife. That means his fight is my fight too. Evelyn, don't, she said. Don't tell me this isn't my problem. Don't tell me to stay out of it. I walked into this with my eyes open. I'm not walking away now. Wade studied her for a long moment. Then he did something she hadn't seen him do before. He smiled. It was small, brief, but it was real. You're stubborn. So I've been told. You have any idea how to fight a man like Boone's? Not yet, Evelyn said, but we've got a week to figure it out. The week that followed was the kind that tests whether 2 people can work together or fall apart under pressure. Evelyn started by doing something Wade hadn't expected. She rode into Red Hollow alone the next morning, hitched the horse outside the general store, and walked straight to the clerk's counter with a purpose that made the thin woman look up sharply. I need to know who keeps the land records for this county, Evelyn said. The woman blinked. That'd be the county clerk's office, over in Milford, about 15 miles east. How often does someone go there from here? Mail coach runs twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays. Today's Wednesday. Then you'll have to wait, or ride there yourself. Evelyn nodded, filed that information away, and left. She stopped next at the saloon, where a graying bartender was sweeping the floor in preparation for the evening crowd. Help you, ma'am? I'm looking for information about a man named Silas Boone. I'm told he does business around here sometimes. The bartender stopped sweeping. His expression went carefully neutral. Don't know much about him. But you know something. The man hesitated, then set the broom aside. Look, Mrs. Granger, so you know who I am. Whole town knows who you are. You married Wade, and folks been talking about nothing else since. Now you're asking questions about Boone, which means trouble's already started. I'm trying to stop trouble before it gets worse. The bartender studied her, weighing something she couldn't see. Finally, he said, Boone shows up every few years with some scheme or another. Loans money, buys debts, forecloses on property. Always legal on paper, always dirty underneath. He's got connections, judges, lawmen, people who owe him favors or fear him enough to look the other way. Has he ever lost? Not that I've heard. Then it's about time someone changed that. The bartender gave her a look that was equal parts respect and pity. You got spine, I'll give you that. But spine doesn't beat a man like Boone. Maybe not, Evelyn said. But it's a start. She left the saloon and made 2 more stops before heading back to the ranch. One at the boarding house, where she asked the dour-faced owner about anyone in town who might have had dealings with Boone. The other at the blacksmith's, where she learned that Boone's men had been seen around Red Hollow 3 times in the past 5 years, always before someone lost their land or their business. By the time she rode back to the ranch, the sun was low, and Wade was sitting on the porch with his rifle across his knees. "Where were you?" "Gathering information." He looked at her like she'd just admitted to robbing a bank. "You went into town asking about Boone?" "I did." "Evelyn, you can't." "I can, and I did. If we're going to fight him, we need to know what we're up against. You've been running from this man for years. I'm not going to run. I'm going to figure out how he operates, and then I'm going to find the holes in his operation." Wade stood up slowly. "You think you can outsmart a man who's been doing this for 20 years? I think 2 people working together have a better chance than 1 person hiding." He didn't have an answer for that. Instead, he looked at her with something that might have been frustration, or might have been the beginning of trust, and said, "You're going to get yourself hurt. Then you better make sure I don't." But what? That night, Evelyn spread everything she'd learned across the kitchen table. Wade sat across from her, listening as she laid out what little she'd managed to gather. "Boone works through debt," she said. "He finds people who are desperate, loans them money, and then uses legal manipulation to make sure they can never repay. Once he's got them trapped, he forecloses, takes the land, sells it, moves on to the next target." "I know all that. But here's what I don't understand. If he's done this before, why hasn't anyone stopped him? Why hasn't anyone taken him to court and won?" Wade leaned back in his chair. "Because the courts are his. He's got judges who owe him, clerks who falsify records, witnesses who'll say whatever he pays them to say. You can't fight him in court when the court's already bought. So we don't fight him in court. Then how do we fight him?" Evelyn tapped her fingers on the table, thinking. "We make it too expensive for him to win. We make it public. We make sure everyone knows exactly what he's doing, and we find people who'll stand with us when it matters." Wade shook his head. "Nobody's going to stand with us. People are too afraid." "Then we make them less afraid. Or we find the ones who are angry enough not to care." "And how do you plan to do that?" "I don't know yet," Evelyn admitted, "but I've got 6 days to figure it out." The next morning, Evelyn rode to Milford. The county clerk's office was a cramped room above a general store staffed by a balding man who looked annoyed by her presence the moment she walked in. "I need to see the land records for Red Hollow," Evelyn said. The clerk didn't look up from the ledger he was writing in. "Those records aren't public. They're county records. That makes them public. Not without proper authorization." Evelyn set $1 on the counter. "Is that proper enough?" The clerk glanced at the money, then at her. "You Wade Granger's wife?" "I am." "Then you should know better than to come poking around in things that don't concern you." "My husband's land concerns me plenty." The clerk closed his ledger with a deliberate thud. "Mrs. Granger, I'm going to give you some advice. Go home. Stay out of Mr. Boone's way. Sign whatever papers he puts in front of you. It'll be easier for everyone." "Easier for Boone, you mean?" The clerk's expression hardened. "I'm not going to help you make trouble. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to do your job. My job is to keep records, not to hand them over to every person who walks in here with a grievance." Evelyn leaned forward slightly. "Your job is to serve the people of this county. That includes me. Now, I can come back with a formal request, which will take time and create paperwork you'll have to explain. Or you can let me look at the records for 10 minutes, take my $1, and we both go about our day." The clerk stared at her. Finally, he snatched the $1 off the counter and jerked his head toward a filing cabinet in the corner. 10 minutes. Don't take anything. Don't damage anything. And don't come back." Evelyn thanked him and went to work. The records were a mess. Poorly organized, barely legible, and incomplete in places where pages had been removed or misfiled. But after 20 minutes of searching, longer than the clerk had allowed, but he'd stopped paying attention, she found what she was looking for. 3 properties in Red Hollow had changed hands in the past 5 years. All 3 had gone to Silas Boone. All 3 had been foreclosed under similar circumstances. Debt, default, forfeiture. But there was something odd about the signatures. They were too similar. Not identical, but close enough to make Evelyn suspicious. She copied down the names, the dates, and the amounts listed on the deeds, then tucked the paper into her coat pocket. When she left the clerk's office, she didn't head straight back to Red Hollow. Instead, she rode to the first property listed on the deeds. It was a small homestead about 8 miles outside of Milford. The house had been abandoned, the windows broken, the land overgrown. But there was a neighbor half a mile down the road, and when Evelyn knocked on his door, he answered with the wary expression of someone used to bad news. "I'm looking for information about the family that used to live here," Evelyn said, gesturing back toward the abandoned property. The man frowned. "The Johnsons? They lost that place 2 years ago. Do you know where they went?" "Back east, I think. They didn't say much before they left, just packed up one day and disappeared." "Did they owe money?" "Everyone owes money out here. But yeah, they borrowed from some businessman. Couldn't pay it back. Next thing anyone knew, the place was foreclosed and sold." "Do you remember the businessman's name?" The man's face went carefully blank. "I don't get involved in other people's business." "Was it Silas Boone?" The man stepped back slightly. "Ma'am, I think you should leave." "Please, I just need to know." "I said leave." He shut the door. Evelyn stood on the porch for a moment, frustrated but not surprised. Fear worked better than loyalty, and Boone had clearly been spreading it thick. She rode back to Red Hollow as the sun began its descent, her mind working through everything she'd learned. Wade was waiting for her when she got home. He didn't ask where she'd been this time, just took the horse and led it to the barn while Evelyn went inside and lit the lamp. When he came back, she had the note spread across the table again. "I found 3 properties Boone took in the past 5 years," she said without preamble. "All foreclosures, all under similar circumstances, and all with signatures that look like they might have been forged." Wade sat down heavily. "Might have been? I'm not an expert, but they're too similar, like someone practiced writing the same name until they got it close enough." "Even if that's true, how does it help us? We can't prove forgery without the original documents, and Boone's not going to hand those over." "No, but we can make noise about it. If we can get enough people questioning his methods, it makes it harder for him to operate." "You're talking about a campaign, public pressure. That takes time we don't have." "Then we make the time." Wade rubbed his face. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical work. "Evelyn, you don't understand what you're dealing with. Boone doesn't care about public opinion. He cares about power, and he's got more of it than we do. Power isn't permanent, it's borrowed, and the more noise we make, the less stable his foundation becomes. Or it makes him come after us harder. He's already coming after us. At least this way. We're not just sitting here waiting for it to happen." Wade looked at her across the table. The lamplight threw shadows across his face, making him look older than he was. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I made a deal with you, and I keep my deals." "This wasn't part of the deal. You signed up for a roof and food, not a fight." Evelyn met his gaze steadily. "Maybe not, but I'm in it now, and I don't quit halfway through something just because it gets hard." Wade didn't say anything for a long time. Then he reached across the table and squeezed her hand once, briefly, before pulling back. "All right. What's the next step?" "Tut." The next step was more dangerous than Evelyn had anticipated. She needed to talk to people who'd been hurt by Boone. People who might be willing to speak publicly if they knew they weren't alone. But finding those people meant asking questions in places where questions weren't welcome. She started in Red Hollow. Knocked on doors, stopped people in the street, asked careful questions about land sales and foreclosures and whether anyone knew of families who'd been forced out. Most people shut her down immediately. A few were polite about it. Others told her to mind her own business. One woman spit at her feet and called her a fool for stirring up trouble. But on the 4th day, she found someone willing to talk. His name was Henry Carver, and he ran a small feed store on the edge of town. He was in his 60s, with hands that shook slightly when he poured her a cup of coffee in the back room of his shop. "You're asking about Boone," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am." "Then you already know what kind of man he is." "I know what he's done to my husband's family. I'm trying to understand what he's done to others." Henry sipped his coffee slowly. "My brother had a ranch about 10 miles north of here. Good land. He borrowed money from Boone 5 years ago to buy cattle. The terms seemed fair, but then Boone started changing them. Added fees, raised interest. My brother couldn't keep up, Within a year, Boone had taken everything. Where's your brother now? Dead. Took his own life 6 months after he lost the ranch. Evelyn felt something cold settle in her stomach. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't bring him back, and it doesn't stop men like Boone from doing the same thing to someone else. That's why I'm asking. I'm trying to stop him. Henry laughed, but there was no humor in it. You and what army? Me and anyone else who's willing to stand up and say they've been hurt by him. Nobody's going to do that. People are too scared. Are you? Henry set his cup down. I'm old. I've got nothing left to lose. But most folks aren't in that position. If I could get people together, if I could show them they're not alone, would you stand with me? Henry looked at her for a long time. Then he said, yeah, I would. It was a small victory, but it was something. By the time Boone's deadline arrived, Evelyn had managed to find 4 people willing to speak against him. 4 people who'd lost property, family, or livelihoods to his schemes. It wasn't an army, but it was a start. Wade was skeptical. 4 people aren't going to stop him. 4 people are 4 more than he's expecting. And what's your plan? Stand on the porch and have them shout at him? No. My plan is to have them ready to testify if this goes to court, and to make sure Boone knows we've got documentation, witnesses, and enough noise that taking this ranch won't be as easy as he thinks. Wade looked at her like she'd lost her mind. You think Boone's going to take us to court? He doesn't work that way. He shows up, intimidates, and takes what he wants. Then we make sure he can't intimidate us. How? Evelyn pulled a folded paper from her pocket and set it on the table. I filed a formal complaint with the county clerk. It's on record now. If Boone tries to take this land, there's a paper trail questioning the legitimacy of his claim. It won't stop him, but it'll slow him down. And the longer we slow him down, the more time we have to build a real defense. Wade stared at the paper. You filed a complaint? I did. Using what evidence? The deed discrepancies I found. The witness statements from the people I talked to. It's not conclusive, but it's enough to create doubt. Wade picked up the paper, read it, and set it back down. You're insane. Probably. This is going to make him angrier. Good. Angry people make mistakes. Wade stood up, paced to the window, and stared out at the darkening land. I spent 5 years running from this, 5 years trying to disappear, and you've just painted a target on both of us. You were already a target. You've been a target since the day your mother borrowed money from him. All I've done is made it harder for him to hit us quietly. Wade turned to look at her. Why? Why what? Why are you doing this? You don't owe me anything. You could leave, pack up, ride out, start over somewhere else. Evelyn stood up and walked over to him. She stopped a few feet away, close enough to see the exhaustion in his face, but not close enough to crowd him. I could, she said, but I'm not going to. Why not? Because I'm tired of running too. Silas Boone arrived exactly 1 week after his last visit, just as he'd promised. He came at midday with the same 3 men, all of them armed, all of them looking like they'd done this before. Boone himself rode at the front, relaxed and confident, like a man on his way to collect a debt he'd already won. Wade and Evelyn were waiting on the porch. Boone reined his horse to a stop at the edge of the property and smiled that smile Evelyn was starting to hate. Mr. Granger, Mrs. Granger, I hope you've had time to reconsider. We've reconsidered, Wade said, and the answer's still no. Boone's smile didn't falter. That's disappointing. I was hoping we could settle this like reasonable people. Reasonable people don't steal land, Evelyn said. Boone shifted his attention to her. Steal is a strong word, Mrs. Granger. I prefer to think of it as collecting what's owed. Based on what? A forged signature? Falsified debt records? For the first time, Boone's smile slipped, just slightly, just enough for Evelyn to know she'd landed a hit. Careful, he said softly. Accusations like that can get a person into trouble. So can fraud, and extortion, and intimidation. Boone's expression hardened. You've been busy. I have. Asking questions, filing complaints, stirring up old grievances that should have stayed buried. Funny thing about grievances, They don't stay buried when the person who caused them is still walking around. Boone dismounted slowly. His men stayed on their horses, hands resting near their guns. He walked toward the porch, stopped at the bottom of the steps, and looked up at Evelyn and Wade with the kind of cold calculation that made Evelyn's skin crawl. "Let me explain something to you," Boone said. "I've been doing this for a long time. I know how to handle people who think they're clever. I know how to deal with obstacles, and I always get what I came for." "Not this time," Wade said. Boone laughed. "You think filing a complaint is going to stop me? You think dragging up old stories and finding a few bitter old men to complain is going to make a difference? I own the courts. I own the clerks. I own half the law in this county. Your little complaint will disappear as quickly as it appeared." "Maybe," Evelyn said. "Or maybe it'll be enough to get other people asking questions. Maybe it'll be enough to make your next deal harder to close. Maybe it'll be enough to make people think twice before they trust you." Boone's jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake. We're making a stand. Then you're going to regret it." He turned to go, but Wade's voice stopped him. "Boone." Boone looked back. "If you come after us," Wade said quietly, "I won't run this time. I won't hide. And I won't let you take what's mine without a fight." Boone studied him for a moment. Then he smiled again, colder than before. "I'm counting on it." He mounted his horse and rode off with his men, leaving nothing behind but dust and the certainty that this wasn't over. That night, Evelyn and Wade sat in the kitchen long after the sun went down. "He's going to come back," Wade said. "I know. And next time he won't come just to talk." "I know that too." Wade looked at her. "Are you scared?" Evelyn thought about it, thought about the way Boone had looked at her, the way his men had watched the house like they were already measuring it for demolition. "Yes," she said, "but I'm not leaving." Wade reached across the table and took her hand. This time, he didn't let go. "Neither am I." But the next 3 days passed in tense anticipation. Evelyn reinforced the doors. Wade cleaned and loaded every gun they had. They moved the most valuable supplies into the cellar in case the house was burned. They slept in shifts, one of them always awake and watching. On the 4th day, nothing happened. On the 5th day, Boone sent a message. It arrived via a boy from town who rode up to the property and handed Wade a sealed envelope before galloping off without a word. Wade opened it on the porch. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a single sentence written in neat, precise handwriting. "You have 3 days to vacate. After that, I take what's mine by force." Evelyn read it over Wade's shoulder. 3 days. That's what it says. What do we do? Wade folded the paper carefully and put it in his pocket. "We get ready." The next morning, Evelyn rode back into town. She found Henry Carver first, then the other 3 people who'd agreed to stand with her. She gathered them in the back room of Henry's store and told them what was happening. "Boone's given us 3 days," she said. "After that, he's coming for the ranch. And when he does, I need witnesses. People who'll see what happens and speak up if it goes to court." "You think it's going to go to court?" one of the men asked. "I don't know, but I want to be ready if it does." Henry nodded slowly. "What do you need us to do?" "Be there. Watch. And if Boone does anything illegal, anything that crosses the line from intimidation to violence, I need you to be willing to testify." The group exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, a woman named Clara spoke up. "Mrs. Granger, we're willing to help, but if Boone sees us there, he'll come after us next." "I know," Evelyn said, "and I wouldn't ask if I had another choice. But right now, you're the only thing standing between us and him taking everything." Clara looked at the others. Then she nodded. "All right, we'll be there." Dick. The last 3 days passed too quickly. Wade spent them fortifying the ranch, building barricades, checking lines of sight, planning escape routes in case things went badly. Evelyn spent them documenting everything. She wrote down every conversation she'd had, every piece of evidence she'd gathered, every name and date and detail that might matter if this ended up in court. She sealed the documents in a waterproof bag and buried them near the well, far enough from the house that they wouldn't be destroyed if the building burned. On the final night, they sat on the porch together and watched the stars come out. "If this goes wrong," Wade said quietly, "I want you to run." "I'm not running." "Evelyn, I said I'm not running. We're in this together. That was the deal. Wade looked at her, and in the faint light from the house, she could see the conflict on his face. I never should have agreed to marry you. Evelyn smiled faintly. Too late now. I'm serious. I brought you into this. If something happens to you, then something happens. But it'll happen because I chose to stay, not because you forced me. Wade was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, You're the stubbornest person I've ever met. Good thing you married me then. He almost smiled. Almost. They sat together in the dark, waiting for whatever dawn would bring. Dawn came gray and cold, the kind of morning where the sun struggled to break through the clouds, and everything felt heavier than it should. Wade was already awake when Evelyn came downstairs. He stood at the window with a cup of coffee gone cold in his hand, staring out at the empty land like he could see what was coming before it arrived. You didn't sleep, Evelyn said. Couldn't. She poured herself coffee from the pot on the stove and joined him at the window. The ranch looked peaceful in the early light, deceptively so. How long do you think we have? Wade didn't take his eyes off the horizon. Hard to say. Could be noon, could be sundown. Boone likes to make people wait, likes the fear to build. Then we don't give him the satisfaction of being afraid. Wade glanced at her. You're afraid. I can see it. Being afraid and showing it are two different things. He almost smiled at that. Almost. They drank their coffee in silence and waited. The riders appeared just after 10 in the morning. There were more of them this time. Not 3, but 7. Boone rode at the front, flanked by his usual men, with 4 additional riders trailing behind. They came slowly, deliberately, kicking up dust that hung in the still air like a declaration of intent. Wade set his cup down and picked up the rifle leaning against the wall. Evelyn checked the pistol tucked into her belt, a weapon Wade had taught her to load 3 days ago, even though she'd never fired one in her life. Stay behind me, Wade said. I'll stay beside you. Evelyn, we settled this already. Wade looked like he wanted to argue, but there wasn't time. The riders were close now, close enough that Evelyn could see the expressions on their faces. Hard men, the kind who'd done violence before and wouldn't hesitate to do it again. They stopped at the edge of the property, a line of horses and armed men, with Silas Boone at the center, looking as calm as if he'd come to discuss the weather. Mr. Granger, Boone called out. Mrs. Granger, your time is up. Wade stepped off the porch, rifle held loosely but ready. Evelyn followed, her hand resting on the pistol at her waist. This is still my land, Wade said. Not according to the law. What law? The one you bought? Boone smiled that infuriating smile. The law is the law, regardless of who interprets it. Now you've had ample warning. I've been more than patient. It's time for you to accept reality and move along. We're not moving. Then you're trespassing, and I'm well within my rights to remove trespassers from property I legally own. Evelyn stepped forward. You don't own anything. That deed you're waving around is based on fraudulent debt records and forged signatures. I've documented it, filed complaints, found witnesses who'll testify to your methods. Boone's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Irritation, maybe. Or respect for the inconvenience she'd caused. Mrs. Granger, you've been busy. I'll grant you that. But busy doesn't mean effective. Your complaints will go nowhere. Your witnesses will disappear or recant. And at the end of the day, I'll still be standing here with legal ownership while you're standing on the side of the road with nothing. Then why are you here with 7 armed men? Evelyn asked. If the law is so clearly on your side, why not just wait for the sheriff to evict us? Boone's smile thinned. Because I'm tired of waiting. And because I want you to understand that when I take something, I take it completely. He gestured to the men behind him. 2 of them dismounted and started walking toward the house. Wade raised the rifle. Stop! The men stopped. Boone held up a hand. Let's not be foolish, Mr. Granger. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and even if you manage to shoot 1 or 2 of my men, the rest will kill you and your wife before you can reload. Is that really how you want this to end? I want it to end with you leaving. That's not going to happen. Wade's finger moved to the trigger. Evelyn could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched. He was calculating odds that didn't favor them. She stepped forward before he could make a decision they couldn't take back. Mr. Boone, she said loudly, projecting her voice. Before you do something you can't undo, you should know that there are witnesses here. People from town. People who are watching right now and will testify to exactly what happens next. Boone's head turned sharply. He scanned the area, and for the first time uncertainty crossed his face. Because Evelyn wasn't bluffing. Henry Carver stood near the tree line to the east, partially hidden but visible enough. Clara was positioned near the barn, her face pale but determined. The other two witnesses were stationed at points around the property, far enough to be safe but close enough to see. Boone's men noticed them too. One of the riders shifted nervously in his saddle. Another exchanged a glance with the man beside him. "Witnesses," Boone said slowly. "How clever." "They've been here since dawn," Evelyn said, "and they're not leaving until you do. So whatever you do next, it won't be quiet, it won't be hidden, and it won't be something you can explain away later." Boone stared at her, and for the first time since they'd met, she saw genuine anger beneath the calculated calm. "You think a few townspeople are going to stop me? I think they'll make it harder for you to pretend this is legal. I think they'll force you to explain why you needed 7 armed men to evict 2 people from a property you claim to own lawfully. I think they'll make enough noise that even the judges you've bought will have trouble ignoring it." Boone's hand moved to his coat pocket. For a moment, Evelyn thought he was reaching for a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a folded document and held it up. "This is a legal deed, signed, notarized, and filed with the county. Everything I'm doing is within the law." "Then prove it," Evelyn said. "Show that deed to the witnesses. Let them see the signature. Let them verify it's legitimate." "I don't have to prove anything to you." "No, but you'll have to prove it to a judge if this goes to trial. And with 4 witnesses ready to testify that you showed up with armed men to forcibly evict us, it will go to trial." Boone's jaw tightened. He looked at his men, then back at Evelyn and Wade. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "Good," Wade said. Boone folded the document and put it back in his pocket. "Fine. You want a legal battle? I'll give you one. But understand this, I've fought these battles before, and I've never lost. You're delaying the inevitable, that's all." He turned to his men. "We're leaving, for now." One of the men frowned. "Boss, we came here to—" "I said we're leaving." The man shut his mouth and nodded. Slowly, the riders turned their horses and began to retreat. Boone lingered a moment longer, his eyes locked on Evelyn. "You're clever," he said quietly. "I'll give you that. But clever only gets you so far. Eventually, you run out of tricks. Then I guess we'll find out what happens after that." Boone tipped his hat, mounted his horse, and rode off with his men trailing behind. The silence that followed was deafening. Wade lowered the rifle slowly, his hand shaking slightly from the adrenaline. Evelyn realized she'd been holding her breath and let it out in a long, shaky exhale. Henry emerged from the tree line, followed by Clara and the others. They gathered near the porch, their faces a mix of relief and lingering fear. "That was close," Henry said. "Too close," Clara added. "He's not going to let this go." "I know," Evelyn said. "But we bought time. That's what matters." Wade turned to the witnesses. "Thank you, all of you. You didn't have to do this." Henry shrugged. "Maybe not, but someone had to stand up to him eventually. Might as well be now." The group stayed for a while, talking through what they'd seen, what they'd heard, and what might come next. By the time they left, the sun was high and the initial rush of fear had faded into exhausted resolve. Evelyn and Wade stood on the porch and watched them go. "That won't stop him," Wade said. "I know. He'll come back with more men or different tactics. He won't let this stand." "Probably not." Wade looked at her. "You're not worried." "I'm terrified. But we made him back down. That's something." "It's something," Wade agreed, "but it's not enough." The next 2 days were strange. Quiet, but not peaceful. Like the calm before a storm that everyone knew was coming but nobody wanted to talk about. Wade worked the ranch with a focus that bordered on obsession. Fixing fences that didn't need fixing, moving supplies that were already organized, anything to keep his hands busy and his mind occupied. Evelyn tried to do the same, but her thoughts kept circling back to Boone, to the way he'd looked at her, to the certainty in his voice when he said he'd never lost. She believed him. Men like Boone didn't get to where they were by losing. They got there by being smarter, more ruthless, and more patient than the people they were crushing, which meant they needed to be smarter too. On the 3rd day, Evelyn rode back to Milford. This time, she didn't go to the county clerk's office. She went to the newspaper. The Milford Gazette was a small operation run by a man named Thomas Brennan, who looked perpetually tired and smelled faintly of ink. His office was cramped, cluttered with papers, and lit by a single window that barely let in enough light to work by. "Help you?" he asked, without looking up from the article he was editing. "I want to place a notice," Evelyn said. "Classifieds are in the back. Talk to my assistant." "This isn't a classified. It's a public notice, a legal one." That got his attention. He set down his pen and looked at her properly for the first time. "What kind of legal notice?" "A notice of contested ownership. A public declaration that Silas Boone's claim to my husband's land is under dispute and subject to legal review." Brennan leaned back in his chair, which creaked ominously. "You're Wade Granger's wife." "I am." "And you're going after Boone." "I am." He whistled softly. "Lady, you've got guts. I'll give you that. But you're also asking me to print something that's going to make a very powerful man very angry. I'm asking you to print the truth. Truth's subjective when it comes to land disputes. Then print the facts. Boone claims he owns the land. We're disputing that claim. That's not subjective. That's just what's happening." Brennan studied her. "Why should I risk it? Boone's got connections. He could make trouble for me." "He could. But if you print this, you're also printing a story. A story about a man who uses legal manipulation to steal land. A story people will read. A story that might sell more papers than whatever you've got in there now." Brennan glanced at the half-finished article on his desk, then back at her. "You're appealing to my sense of greed. I'm appealing to your sense of business, and maybe a little bit to your sense of justice, if you've got one." He smiled faintly. "Justice doesn't pay the bills." "No, but a good story does." Brennan tapped his fingers on the desk, thinking. Finally, he said, "All right, I'll print your notice. But I'm also going to write an article about it, about the dispute, about Boone's methods. And if it turns out you're lying or this all falls apart, I'm going to print that too." "That's fair." "It'll run in this week's edition, Friday." "Thank you." As Evelyn stood to leave, Brennan called after her. "Mrs. Granger?" She turned. "You really think you can beat him?" "I don't know, but I'm going to make him work for it." Gesagt. The notice ran on Friday, just as Brennan had promised. Evelyn rode into town early that morning and bought 3 copies of the Gazette. The notice was on page 2, in small print but unmistakable. Above it was Brennan's article, titled "Land Dispute in Red Hollow Raises Questions About Local Business Practices." It wasn't a long article, but it was enough. It named Boone. It outlined his pattern of foreclosures. It mentioned the witnesses and the complaints filed with the county. By noon, the entire town had heard about it. Evelyn walked down the main street and felt the shift in atmosphere. People stared. Some nodded respectfully. Others looked away quickly, like they didn't want to be associated with her. But everyone knew. The silence Boone had relied on was starting to crack. She stopped at the general store and found the thin woman behind the counter reading the article with wide eyes. "Mrs. Granger," the woman said, her voice a mix of awe and fear. "You really did it." "I did. He's going to be furious. I'm counting on it." The woman shook her head slowly. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most foolish." "Probably both." Evelyn bought supplies and rode back to the ranch, the newspapers tucked safely in her saddlebag. Wade was waiting on the porch when she arrived. She could tell by his expression that he'd already heard. "Someone rode out this morning to tell me," he said. "Said the whole town's talking." "Good. Evelyn, you just made this a public fight. You understand what that means?" "It means Boone can't make us disappear quietly. It also means he can't afford to lose. If he backs down now, everyone will see it. His whole operation depends on fear and the appearance of invincibility. You just challenged both. Then he'll have to decide what's more important, winning this fight or protecting his reputation." Wade ran a hand through his hair. "You're betting everything on him choosing reputation. I'm betting on him being human, and humans make mistakes when they're angry." The response came faster than either of them expected. 2 days after the article ran, a man arrived at the ranch, not one of Boone's hired guns. Someone different, older, well-dressed, carrying a leather satchel that marked him as a professional. Wade and Evelyn met him at the property line, both of them wary. "Mr. and Mrs. Granger," the man said, tipping his hat. My name is Arthur Pembroke. I'm an attorney representing Mr. Silas Boone. We don't have anything to say to you, Wade said. I understand, but I have been instructed to deliver a message and a proposal. We're not interested in proposals. Pembroke held up a hand. Please, just hear me out. My client is willing to settle this matter without further escalation. Evelyn crossed her arms. What kind of settlement? Mr. Boone is prepared to withdraw his claim to this property in exchange for compensation. He's willing to accept $3,000 as settlement for the debts he alleges your husband's mother incurred. $3,000? Wade said. That's 10 times what she actually borrowed. It's the amount Mr. Boone calculates as owed, including interest and fees accrued over the years. It's extortion. Pembroke's expression didn't change. It's a settlement offer, one that would allow you to retain your property and avoid a lengthy, expensive legal battle. We don't have $3,000, Evelyn said. Then I suggest you find a way to acquire it. Mr. Boone is willing to give you 60 days. After that, the offer expires and the matter proceeds to court. Where Boone owns the judge, Wade said. I wouldn't know anything about that, Pembroke said smoothly. I'm simply here to deliver the offer. You should consider it carefully. Legal battles are costly, time-consuming, and often end poorly for those without resources. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a document. This is the formal proposal. Read it, discuss it. If you choose to accept, send word to my office in Milford. He handed the document to Wade, tipped his hat again, and rode off. Wade and Evelyn stood in silence, staring at the paper. $3,000, Wade said finally. Might as well be $3 million. It's a trap, Evelyn said. Of course it's a trap. But what choice do we have? We fight. With what? We don't have money for a lawyer, we don't have money for anything. And even if we did, Boone controls the courts. Evelyn took the document from his hands and read through it carefully. The language was dense, legal, designed to be intimidating. But beneath the formality, it was exactly what Pembroke had described. $3,000 in 60 days, or the matter went to court. He's giving us time, she said slowly. Time to fail. Time to scramble and come up empty. Time to feel the pressure and break. Or time to figure out another way. Wade looked at her. What other way? I don't know yet, but we've got 60 days to find out. That night, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table with the settlement document spread in front of her, along with every scrap of paper she'd collected over the past weeks. Deeds, complaints, witness statements, notes from her conversations with Henry and the others. Wade sat across from her, silent and brooding. There has to be something, Evelyn muttered, more to herself than to him. Some angle we haven't considered. We've considered everything. Boone's got the law on his side, the money to outlast us, and the connections to bury us if we fight. Then we change the battlefield. How? Evelyn looked up from the papers. We go public, not just one article, a campaign. We get Brennan to keep writing. We get other towns involved. We make this so visible that Boone can't operate in the shadows anymore. That'll take time. And money. We've got 60 days. And as for money, she trailed off, thinking. We sell something, livestock, equipment, whatever we can spare. That won't get us close to 3,000. It doesn't have to. We're not trying to pay him. We're trying to fund a fight. Wade leaned back in his chair. You really think we can win this? I think we can make him wish he'd never come here. He almost smiled at that. You're relentless. So are you. You just forgot for a while. Wade looked at her across the table, and something shifted in his expression. Not hope, exactly, but something close to it. All right, he said. What's the first step? We talk to Brennan. We convince him to keep writing, and then we find every person Boone's ever hurt and we get them to speak up. That's going to be dangerous. Everything about this is dangerous. Wade nodded slowly. Then we better get started. Must it? The next morning they rode to Milford together. Brennan was in his office, hunched over his desk with ink-stained fingers, and the perpetually tired expression of someone who worked too much and slept too little. Mrs. Granger, he said when she walked in. And Mr. Granger, I was wondering when you'd show up. You were expecting us? Wade asked. I write an article that gets half the county talking, and the subjects of that article don't come knocking? That'd be unusual. Evelyn got straight to the point. I need you to keep writing. Brennan set down his pen. About Boone? About everything. His methods, his history, every person he's hurt, every property he's taken. I want this to be more than one article. I want it to be a story people can't ignore. That's a bold request. It's a necessary one. Brennan leaned back in his chair. You understand what you're asking? If I keep writing about Boone, he's going to come after me. And unlike you, I don't have a ranch to defend, just a printing press and a stubborn refusal to be pushed around. That's exactly why I'm asking you, because you're stubborn enough not to back down. He smiled faintly. Flattery and truth, a dangerous combination. Will you do it? Brennan looked at Wade. What about you? You on board with this? I'm standing here, aren't I? Fair enough. Brennan picked up his pen and tapped it against the desk. All right, I'll keep writing, but I need material, names, dates, facts I can verify. If I'm going to make this a crusade, it has to be solid. Evelyn pulled out the papers she'd brought and spread them across his desk. This is everything I've gathered so far, witness statements, property records, complaints. Brennan scanned the documents, his eyes sharpening with professional interest. This is good. This is very good. Give me a week. I'll have another article ready. Thank you. As they turned to leave, Brennan called after them. Mrs. Granger? Mr. Granger? They stopped. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Not many people have the spine to stand up to a man like Boone. Even fewer have the brains to do it smart. You've got both. Don't lose that. We won't, Evelyn said. Outside, Wade exhaled slowly. One ally down. How many more do we need? As many as we can get. Muchas. Over the next 2 weeks, Evelyn and Wade became a familiar sight in towns across the county. They rode to places they'd never been, knocked on doors of people they'd never met, and asked questions that made folks uncomfortable. But slowly, painstakingly, they built a network of voices. A farmer in Dorset who'd lost his land to Boone 3 years ago. A widow in Copper Springs whose late husband had been driven to bankruptcy by fraudulent debt claims. A blacksmith in Red Hollow who'd watched his competitor get forced out of business through legal manipulation. Each person had a story. Each story added another piece to the puzzle, and each time Evelyn wrote down their testimony, she felt the invisible weight of Boone's empire start to crack just a little more. Brennan published his second article on schedule, then a third, then a fourth. Each one peeled back another layer of Boone's operation. Each one made it harder for him to claim legitimacy. And each one made him angrier. The response came on the 32nd day after the settlement offer. Evelyn was in town picking up supplies when she noticed the new notice posted outside the sheriff's office. It was a warrant for her arrest. Charge: criminal libel and defamation of character against Silas Boone. Her hands went cold as she read it. The sheriff himself was standing nearby, watching her with an expression that was equal parts sympathy and resignation. Mrs. Granger, he said quietly, this is ridiculous. Maybe, but it's legal. Boone filed a formal complaint. Judge signed the warrant. I'm obligated to enforce it. You know this is retaliation. What I know and what I can prove are two different things. Evelyn looked at the warrant again. When? I'm supposed to bring you in today, but I can give you until morning. Go home. Talk to your husband. Figure out what you're going to do. Thank you. The sheriff nodded. For what it's worth, I don't like this any more than you do, but I've got a job to do. Evelyn rode back to the ranch with her heart pounding and her mind racing. Wade took one look at her face and knew something was wrong. What happened? Boone filed charges. Criminal libel. There's a warrant for my arrest. Wade's face went white. When? Sheriff's coming for me in the morning. Then we run. We can't run. That's what he wants. If I run, it proves I'm guilty. It undermines everything we've been building. If you don't run, he'll put you in jail. And once you're in jail, he can do whatever he wants. Evelyn paced the kitchen, thinking. There has to be another way. What way? You can't fight a warrant. No, but I can make sure everyone knows why it was issued. She stopped pacing and looked at Wade. I need to go back to Brennan. Tonight. I need him to write about this. About the warrant, about what Boone's trying to do. That's not going to stop the sheriff from arresting you. No, but it'll make sure people know the truth. Wade grabbed his coat. Then let's go. They rode through the dark to Milford, pushing the horses harder than they should have. When they reached Brennan's office, the lights were still burning. Brennan looked up when they burst through the door, startled but not entirely surprised. "I heard," he said. "Word travels fast." "Can you write about it?" Evelyn asked. "Can you get it in this week's edition?" "I can. But Mrs. Granger, you understand what this means? If I write about the warrant, it confirms you're the source of the other articles. It ties you directly to everything we've published." "Good. Let them know it's me. Let them know I'm not hiding." Brennan looked at Wade. "You're all right with this?" "No," Wade said. "But she's doing it anyway." Brennan picked up his pen. "Then let's make it count." He wrote through the night while Evelyn and Wade waited. By dawn, the article was finished. It was blunt, direct. It named Boone. It named the warrant. And it made the case that the charges were retaliation for speaking the truth. "This'll run tomorrow," Brennan said. "By the time people read it, you'll already be in custody. But they'll know why." "That's all I need," Evelyn said. They rode back to the ranch as the sun came up, knowing they had only hours left. The sheriff arrived mid-morning with a deputy in tow. He looked genuinely sorry. "Mrs. Granger, I'm afraid I have to take you in." Evelyn nodded. She'd expected this, prepared for it as much as anyone could. Wade stood beside her, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. "How long?" he asked. "Hearings in 3 days. Judge will determine bail then. 3 days in jail for a crime she didn't commit." "I'm sorry, I don't make the laws. I just enforce them." Evelyn touched Wade's arm. "It's all right. It's not all right." "I know, but it's necessary." She turned to the sheriff. "Can I have a moment?" He nodded and stepped back. Evelyn looked at Wade. "Don't do anything stupid while I'm gone." "I'm not promising that." "Try, please." He pulled her into a brief, fierce embrace. "I'll get you out." "I know." The sheriff led her to his horse and helped her mount behind him. As they rode away, Evelyn looked back once and saw Wade standing alone in front of the ranch, watching her disappear over the hill. The jail in Milford was a small stone building that smelled like dampness and old sweat. There were 3 cells, 2 of them empty. Evelyn was led to the third and locked inside with nothing but a narrow cot, a bucket, and a barred window too high to see out of properly. The sheriff lingered at the door. "I'll make sure you get meals, and if you need anything, I'll be fine." He nodded, clearly uncomfortable, and left. Evelyn sat on the cot and stared at the wall. 3 days. She had 3 days to sit here while Boone tightened his grip and Wade faced everything alone. The first day dragged. She paced the small cell, counted the stones in the wall, tried to sleep but couldn't. Her mind kept circling back to the ranch, to Wade, to all the things that could go wrong while she was trapped here. The second day, Brennan's article came out. She heard about it from the deputy who brought her breakfast. He was young, maybe 20, with a nervous energy that suggested he wasn't used to dealing with prisoners who weren't drunk or violent. "There's a story about you in the paper," he said, sliding the tray through the bars. "What does it say?" "That you're innocent, that Boone's using the law to silence you, that this whole thing is retaliation." He hesitated. "Is it true?" "Every word." The deputy looked at her for a long moment, then left without another word. Later that afternoon, she had a visitor. Henry Carver stood outside her cell with his hat in his hands, looking older and more tired than she remembered. "Mrs. Granger?" "Henry, you shouldn't be here." "Probably not, but I wanted you to know people are talking. That article stirred things up. Folks who were too scared to speak before are starting to ask questions." "Questions don't get me out of here." "No, but they're a start." He glanced toward the door, then lowered his voice. "Your husband came to see me yesterday, asked if I knew any lawyers who might take your case." "Do you?" "There's one in the next county, man named Preston. He's got a reputation for taking on cases nobody else will touch." I gave Wade his name. "Thank you," Henry nodded. "You take care of yourself in here, and don't let Boone break you." "I don't plan to." After he left, Evelyn sat on the cot and thought about Wade riding across the county looking for a lawyer they couldn't afford. The image made her chest ache. The third day arrived with agonizing slowness. The hearing was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. The deputy came for her at 1, unlocking the cell and leading her down a corridor to a small room that served as the courthouse. It wasn't much. A single judge's bench, a few rows of wooden seats. a table for the accused and another for the prosecution. Silas Boone sat at the prosecution table with Arthur Pembroke beside him. Both men looked calm, confident, like this was already decided. Wade sat in the front row behind the defense table. When Evelyn walked in, he stood immediately, his face tight with worry. "You all right?" he asked quietly. "I've been better." A door opened and a man entered. Late 40s, graying hair, wearing a worn suit that had seen better days. He carried a leather satchel and moved with the efficiency of someone who'd done this too many times. "Mrs. Granger," he said, extending his hand. "James Preston. Your husband hired me yesterday." Evelyn shook his hand. "He didn't mention he'd found anyone." "That's because I wasn't sure I'd take the case until I read the articles. After that, I couldn't refuse." He set his satchel on the table and pulled out a stack of papers. "We don't have much time, so let me be direct. This is a bail hearing, not a trial. The judge will determine whether you're released pending trial and under what conditions." "What are my chances?" "Honestly, depends on the judge and on how well Boone's gotten to him." Before Evelyn could respond, the bailiff called the room to order. The judge entered. He was an older man with a stern face and the kind of presence that suggested he'd been doing this job too long to care about anything except the law. "Case of Boone versus Granger," the bailiff announced. "Criminal libel and defamation." The judge looked at Pembroke. "Counsel for the plaintiff, state your case." Pembroke stood smoothly. "Your Honor, Mr. Boone has been the victim of a sustained campaign of defamation orchestrated by the defendant, Mrs. Evelyn Granger. Through a series of false accusations published in local newspapers, she has damaged his reputation, his business, and his standing in the community. The charges are clear, the evidence is substantial, and we ask that bail be denied given the defendant's demonstrated willingness to continue these attacks." The judge turned to Preston. "Defense?" Preston stood. "Your Honor, Mrs. Granger is accused of criminal libel, a charge that requires proof of malicious intent and demonstrable falsehood. The statements in question are matters of public concern regarding business practices that have affected numerous members of this community. Mrs. Granger has no prior criminal record, significant ties to the community through her marriage and property, and poses no flight risk. We request reasonable bail." The judge looked at Evelyn. "Mrs. Granger, do you understand the charges against you?" "I do, Your Honor." "And do you intend to continue publishing statements about Mr. Boone?" Evelyn glanced at Preston, who gave her a subtle nod. "I intend to tell the truth, Your Honor. If that constitutes publication, then yes." The judge's expression didn't change. "The truth is a matter for trial, not for you to determine unilaterally. With respect, Your Honor, the truth exists whether or not a trial confirms it." Pembroke stood quickly. "Your Honor, the defendant's statement demonstrates exactly the kind of reckless disregard for—" "I can hear what she said, Mr. Pembroke." The judge looked at Evelyn again. "Mrs. Granger, your commitment to honesty is noted, but this court operates on evidence, not conviction. You will refrain from making any further public statements about Mr. Boone until this matter is resolved. Understood?" Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that silence was exactly what Boone wanted. But Preston's hand touched her arm lightly, a warning. "Understood, Your Honor." The judge shuffled some papers. "Bail is set at $500. The defendant is to remain within the county, surrender any firearms, and make no public statements regarding the plaintiff until trial. Trial date is set for 6 weeks from today. This hearing is adjourned." He struck his gavel and left. Evelyn turned to Preston. $500? It could have been worse. He could have denied bail entirely. "We don't have $500. Wade stepped forward. "Yes, we do." Evelyn stared at him. "Wade, I sold the cattle. Got enough to cover bail and Preston's retainer. The cattle were worth less than you." He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Come on, let's get you out of here." Guys. The process of posting bail took another hour. By the time they walked out of the courthouse, the sun was low, and Evelyn felt hollowed out from exhaustion. Preston walked with them to their horses. "I'll start preparing your defense immediately. I'll need detailed documentation of everything Boone's done. Every witness statement, every property record, every piece of evidence you've gathered." "I've got most of it at the ranch," Evelyn said. "Good. I'll come by tomorrow to review it. In the meantime, remember, no public statements. Boone's looking for any excuse to have you arrested again. What about Brennan? Can he still write? Brennan's not under a gag order. He can write whatever he wants, but you can't be quoted, and you can't provide him with new information directly. Understand? Evelyn nodded reluctantly. Preston tipped his hat. You did well in there. Most people crumble under that kind of pressure. You didn't. I didn't have much choice. There's always a choice. You chose to fight. That matters. He left, and Evelyn climbed onto her horse with Wade beside her. They rode in silence until they were clear of town. You shouldn't have sold the cattle, Evelyn said quietly. What was I supposed to do? Leave you in jail? We needed that money for the ranch. I need you more than I need cattle. Evelyn looked at him, surprised by the bluntness of the statement. Wade kept his eyes on the road ahead, but his jaw was tight. We're going to lose everything, she said. Maybe, but we'll lose it together. They rode the rest of the way home without speaking, each lost in thoughts too heavy to share. The ranch felt different when they got back, emptier. The absence of the cattle left the fields feeling hollow, and the knowledge that they'd been sold to keep Evelyn out of jail hung over everything like a weight. Wade unsaddled the horses while Evelyn went inside and lit the lamps. The house was cold. She built a fire and put coffee on, then sat at the table and stared at nothing. Wade came in a few minutes later. He poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from her. Preston seems competent, he said. He does. You think we can win? I don't know. He said it depends on the judge. And on whether Boone's bought him. That too. Wade drank his coffee. I'm sorry. Evelyn looked up. For what? For dragging you into this. You came out here looking for stability, and all I've given you is chaos. I knew what I was getting into. No, you didn't. Nobody could have predicted this. Maybe not, but I'm still here. Wade met her eyes. Why? Because I made a promise, and because... She stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence. Because what? Because you're worth it. The words hung in the air between them, surprising both of them with their weight. Wade looked away first. I don't know if that's true. It is. I've spent 5 years running, 5 years afraid of my own shadow. You've been here less than 3 months, and you've done more to fight Boone than I ever did. That's not fair to yourself. You survived. That took strength. Survival isn't the same as living. No, but it's a start. Wade was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, when this is over, if we win, I'm going to rebuild this place properly. Not just patch it together. Actually fix it. Make it something worth keeping. I'd like that. And I'm going to be a better husband. Evelyn smiled faintly. You're not a bad husband now. I'm a husband who married you out of convenience and gave you nothing but trouble. You gave me a home. That's more than anyone else offered. Wade reached across the table and took her hand. This time, he didn't let go. I'm glad you walked up to me that day. Even with everything that's happened. I'm glad. So am I. They sat like that for a while, hands clasped across the table, the fire crackling in the stove, both of them too tired to say anything else but needing the connection more than words. Clochet. Preston arrived the next morning as promised. He spent 3 hours going through every document Evelyn had collected, asking questions, taking notes, and occasionally muttering to himself. This is good, he said finally. Better than I expected. You've documented a clear pattern of fraudulent foreclosures. If we can get even half of these witnesses to testify, we've got a case. They're willing to testify, Wade said. That's the challenge. Boone spent years making sure people are too afraid to speak against him. We need to give them a reason to overcome that fear. How? Evelyn asked. By showing them they're not alone. By building momentum. The more people who step forward, the safer it becomes for others to follow. That's going to take time. We've only got 6 weeks. Then we'd better work fast. Preston gathered his papers and stood. I'll start contacting the witnesses on your list. In the meantime, you two need to stay visible. Go to town. Talk to people. Just don't talk about Boone. Show them you're not hiding. Show them you're not beaten. What if Boone comes after us again? Wade asked. Then we document it and add it to the case. Every move he makes against you strengthens our argument that this is retaliation, not legitimate legal action. After Preston left, Evelyn and Wade looked at each other. "You heard him," Evelyn said. "We need to be visible." "I hate going into town." "I know, but we're doing it anyway." Mot. They rode into Red Hollow the next day. The reaction was immediate. People stared. Some nodded respectfully. Others turned away quickly, pretending they hadn't seen them. A few crossed the street to avoid walking past them, but they were noticed. That was the point. Evelyn stopped at the general store first. The thin woman behind the counter looked nervous when they walked in. "Mrs. Granger? Mr. Granger. We need supplies," Evelyn said, keeping her tone normal. "Flour, sugar, coffee, the usual." The woman nodded and started gathering items with shaking hands. "I heard about the trial. 6 weeks, they're saying." "That's right." "Whole town's talking about it." "I imagine they are." The woman hesitated, then lowered her voice. "For what it's worth, I hope you win. Boone's taken too much from too many people. Someone needs to stand up to him." "Thank you." They bought their supplies and left, made stops at the blacksmith, the feed store, and the saloon. Each time, the reaction was similar. Fear mixed with quiet support. People who wouldn't speak up publicly but wanted Evelyn and Wade to know they weren't entirely alone. By the time they rode back to the ranch, word of their appearance had spread through town like wildfire. That night, someone came to the ranch. Wade heard the horse first. He grabbed the rifle and went to the door. Evelyn right behind him. But it wasn't Boone or his men. It was Clara, the woman who'd been one of their witnesses when Boone first came with his riders. She dismounted quickly, clearly nervous. "I'm sorry to come so late." "What's wrong?" Evelyn asked. "I wanted to tell you in person. I'm going to testify." Evelyn blinked. "At the trial?" "Yes. I talked to Mr. Preston today. He explained what he needed, and I thought about it, and..." Clara took a breath. "My husband lost his shop because of Boone. We lost everything. I've been too scared to say anything for 3 years, but if you're willing to fight him, then I should be too." "Clara, you don't have to do this. It could be dangerous." "I know, but it's the right thing to do, and I'm tired of being afraid." Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest. One witness. One person willing to step forward. "Thank you," she said. "You don't know what this means." "I think I do." Clara glanced back toward town. "I should go, but I wanted you to know you're not fighting this alone." After she left, Wade and Evelyn stood on the porch in the dark. "One witness," Wade said quietly. "One's better than none." "You think others will follow?" "I hope so." Over the next 2 weeks, 3 more people came forward. Not publicly, but quietly, in conversations with Preston or in late-night visits to the ranch. Each one had been hurt by Boone. Each one was willing to testify. Preston worked tirelessly, building the case piece by piece. He filed motions, gathered depositions, prepared arguments, and slowly, methodically, he constructed a defense that was starting to look like it might actually have a chance. But Boone wasn't sitting idle. 10 days before the trial, a fire broke out in Henry Carver's feed store. The whole building burned to the ground. Henry barely escaped with his life. The sheriff called it accidental. A lantern knocked over. Bad luck. But everyone knew better. Henry showed up at the ranch the next day with soot still on his clothes and fury in his eyes. "He burned me out," Henry said. "That bastard burned me out because I agreed to testify." "You can't prove that," Wade said. "I don't need to prove it. I know it. Everyone knows it." "Are you all right?" Evelyn asked. "I'm alive. That's about all I can say." Henry looked at them both. "I'm still testifying, just so you know. He thinks he can scare me off. He's wrong." "Henry, you don't have to..." "Yes, I do. Because if I back down now, he wins. And I'm done letting him win." After Henry left, Wade paced the kitchen. "This is getting worse." "I know. People are getting hurt. Property's being destroyed. How far is Boone willing to go?" "As far as it takes," Evelyn said. "That's who he is." "Then we need to be ready for anything." Sabri shapes. The final week before the trial was the longest of Evelyn's life. Every day felt stretched thin, time moving too slowly and too quickly at once. Preston came to the ranch almost daily, reviewing testimony, preparing questions, anticipating arguments Pembroke might make. Boone's going to attack your credibility, he told Evelyn. He's going to paint you as a troublemaker who fabricated evidence to avoid paying legitimate debts. You need to be ready for that. I am. Are you? Because standing in a courtroom with a hostile prosecutor questioning your integrity is different from sitting here planning strategy. I'll be fine. Preston looked at her carefully. I believe you, but fine isn't enough. You need to be unshakable, because if you crack, even for a moment, Boone will use it. Then I won't crack. Preston nodded. Good. The night before the trial, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through everything that could go wrong. The witnesses could refuse to testify at the last minute. The judge could rule against them on every motion. Boone could produce evidence they hadn't anticipated. She heard Wade moving in the loft above her. He couldn't sleep either. Wade, she called softly. Yeah? You awake? Obviously. Come down here. There was a pause, then the sound of footsteps on the ladder. Wade appeared in the doorway, still fully dressed. What's wrong? Nothing, She stopped, unsure how to say what she was feeling. I don't want to be alone tonight. Wade crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. You're scared. Terrified. Me too. What if we lose? Then we lose. But at least we'll lose knowing we fought. That's not very comforting. I'm not very good at comfort. Evelyn almost smiled. No, but you're good at other things. Like what? Like being here. Like not running. Like standing beside me even when it would be easier not to. Wade looked at her in the darkness. You know I'm not good at this. At saying the right things. At being the kind of husband you probably deserved. You're exactly the kind of husband I need. How do you figure that? Because you're honest. Because you don't give up. Because when I needed someone to fight beside me, you were there. Wade reached out and took her hand. If we get through this, when we get through this. When we get through this, I want to do better. Be better. Not just survive, but actually build something worth having. We will. You sound certain. I have to be. If I'm not, I'll fall apart. Wade squeezed her hand. Then I'll be certain enough for both of us. He stayed with her until she finally fell asleep, sitting on the edge of the bed in the dark, holding her hand like it was the only thing keeping either of them grounded. The morning of the trial arrived cold and bright. Evelyn dressed carefully in her best dress, the one she'd worn when they got married. It felt appropriate somehow, like coming full circle. Wade wore his cleanest shirt and the coat he saved for town. They looked at each other in the kitchen, both of them pale, both of them trying not to show how afraid they were. Ready? Wade asked. No, but let's go anyway. They rode to Milford together. Preston met them outside the courthouse, looking calm and professional despite the exhaustion in his eyes. The courtroom's packed, he said. Word's gotten out. Half the county's here to watch. Is that good or bad? Evelyn asked. Depends on how it goes. If we win, it's good. If we lose, it's just more people watching us fail. Comforting. I'm a lawyer, not a cheerleader. Preston straightened his coat. All right, here's how this works. Opening statements first. Then prosecution presents their case. We cross-examine. Then we present our defense. Closing statements. Jury deliberates. We wait. How long does this usually take? Days? Maybe a week if it gets complicated. And if the jury's bought? Preston's expression darkened. Then it won't matter how good our case is, but let's worry about that if it happens. Right now, focus on telling your story clearly and honestly. That's all you can control. They walked into the courthouse together. Preston was right. The courtroom was packed. People filled every seat, lined the walls, craned their necks to see. Evelyn recognized faces from Red Hollow, from Milford, from towns she'd visited gathering witnesses. And sitting in the front row on the opposite side, calm and confident, was Silas Boone. He looked at Evelyn as she walked in, and he smiled. Not a friendly smile, a knowing smile. The smile of a man who'd already won and was just waiting for everyone else to figure it out. Evelyn forced herself to look away and take her seat at the defense table. The bailiff called the court to order. The judge entered, the same stern-faced man from the bail hearing. Case of the People versus Evelyn Granger, the bailiff announced. criminal libel and defamation of character. The judge looked at both tables. Counsel, are you ready to proceed? The prosecution is ready, Your Honor, Pembroke said. The defense is ready, Your Honor, Preston replied. Then let's begin. Mr. Pembroke, your opening statement. Pembroke stood, smoothed his jacket, and walked to the center of the courtroom. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about reputation, about the damage that can be done when someone decides that truth is whatever they want it to be. Silas Boone is a respected businessman who has operated in this county for 20 years. He has provided loans to families in need, given people opportunities when banks would not. And yes, when those loans were not repaid, he has exercised his legal right to collect. That is not a crime. That is business. But the defendant, Evelyn Granger, did not see it that way. Instead, she launched a campaign of lies and half-truths designed to destroy Mr. Boone's reputation, his livelihood, and his standing in this community. She published false accusations. She coerced witnesses into making statements they couldn't verify. She used a newspaper to spread malicious falsehoods. And she did all of this not in pursuit of justice, but in pursuit of avoiding legitimate debts her husband's family owed. This case is simple. The defendant lied. She knew she was lying, and she caused measurable harm. The law is clear on this matter, and we will prove beyond any doubt that Evelyn Granger is guilty. Pembroke sat down. Preston stood. Your Honor, members of the jury, Mr. Pembroke just told you this case is about reputation. He's right, but not in the way he thinks. This case is about a man who has spent 20 years building a reputation on fear, fraud, and manipulation. Silas Boone doesn't provide opportunities. He creates traps. He lures desperate people into loans they can't repay, then uses forged documents, falsified records, and bought testimony to steal their property. He has done this dozens of times. And when someone finally had the courage to speak up, when my client stood up and said enough, he used the same corrupt system to silence her. This isn't about libel. This is about retaliation, about a powerful man trying to crush someone who dared to expose him. And we will prove through testimony, through documents, and through the pattern of Boone's behavior that everything Evelyn Granger said was true. This case isn't about lies. It's about the truth finally catching up to a man who thought he was above it. Preston sat down. The judge looked at Pembroke. Call your first witness. And the trial began. Pembroke's first witness was a clerk from the county office, a nervous man in his 40s who kept adjusting his collar as he took the stand. State your name for the record, Pembroke said. Martin Hendricks. And what is your occupation? I'm a records clerk for the county. How long have you held that position? 12 years? Pembroke walked to his table and picked up a document. Mr. Hendricks, are you familiar with the land deed for the property currently occupied by Wade and Evelyn Granger? Yes, sir. And according to county records, who holds legal claim to that property? Hendricks hesitated, glancing toward Boone. Mr. Silas Boone. Based on what? Based on a foreclosure action taken 3 years ago against the previous owner, Mrs. Margaret Granger, mother of Wade Granger. The debt went unpaid, and the property was legally transferred to Mr. Boone as settlement. And is this transfer properly documented and filed? Yes, sir. Thank you. No further questions. Preston stood for cross-examination. He approached the witness stand slowly, his expression neutral. Mr. Hendricks, you said the transfer was properly documented. What does that mean exactly? It means the paperwork was filed correctly. Signatures, dates, notarization. Did you personally verify those signatures? Hendricks shifted. That's not my job. I just file what's submitted. So you don't actually know if the signatures are legitimate? I assume they are. Assumption isn't verification, is it? No, sir. In your 12 years as a clerk, have you ever seen documents submitted by Mr. Boone that later turned out to be fraudulent or contested? Pembroke stood. Objection. Calls for speculation. I'm asking about his direct experience, Your Honor, Preston said. The judge considered. I'll allow it. Answer the question, Mr. Hendricks. Hendricks looked uncomfortable. There have been disputes, but that's not unusual in land transfers. How many disputes involving Mr. Boone specifically? I don't have an exact number. More than 5? Probably. More than 10? Maybe. Would it surprise you to learn that Mr. Boone has been involved in 17 contested land transfers in the past 6 years? Hendricks said nothing. Thank you, Mr. Hendricks. No further questions. The day proceeded in similar fashion. Pembroke called witnesses who testified to the legitimacy of Boone's business practices. Preston dismantled their testimony piece by piece, exposing gaps in their knowledge, inconsistencies in their statements, and the convenient way they all seemed to remember only what benefited Boone. By the time court adjourned for the day, the prosecution's case looked weaker than it had that morning. But it wasn't broken. Not yet. Evelyn and Wade rode back to the ranch in silence, both too exhausted to talk. Preston had told them the real fight would begin tomorrow when the defense presented its case. That night, Evelyn lay awake thinking about all the things that could still go wrong. The witnesses could falter. The jury could ignore the evidence. The judge could rule against them on technicalities. She heard Wade come down from the loft again. This time, he didn't wait to be invited. He simply walked into the bedroom and sat beside her. "You did good today," he said. "I didn't do anything. I just sat there." "You didn't break. That's something." Evelyn looked at him in the darkness. "What if we lose?" "Then we lose. But we'll figure out what comes next." "What if there is no next? What if he takes everything?" Wade was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Then we start over. Somewhere else. Together." "Just like that?" "Just like that." Evelyn felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "You really mean that?" "I do." She reached for his hand. "I'm scared." "I know, so am I." "But you're still here. Where else would I be?" They sat together in the dark, hands clasped, drawing strength from the simple fact of not being alone. The second day of the trial began with Preston calling Henry Carver to the stand. Henry walked to the witness box with his head high, despite the exhaustion visible in every line of his face. The fire had taken more than his business. It had taken something vital, some piece of security he'd never get back. Preston approached him gently. "Mr. Carver, please tell the court about your experience with Silas Boone." Henry took a breath. "My brother owned a ranch. Good land. He borrowed money from Boone to expand his operation. The terms seemed fair at first, but then fees started appearing, interest rates changed. Within a year, the debt had tripled. My brother couldn't pay. Boone foreclosed, took everything." "What happened to your brother?" Henry's voice cracked slightly. "He took his own life 6 months later." The courtroom went silent. "And recently, Mr. Carver, something happened to your business, didn't it?" "My feed store burned down 10 days ago. Do you know how the fire started?" "The sheriff said it was an accident, but I know better." Pembroke stood. "Objection. Speculation." "Your Honor, the witness is entitled to state his belief based on the circumstances," Preston said. "I'll allow it, but keep it factual, Mr. Preston." Preston nodded. "Mr. Carver, why do you believe the fire was not an accident?" "Because it happened the same day I agreed to testify in this trial. Because Boone has a history of intimidating people who speak against him. Because the fire started in 3 places at once, which doesn't happen with knocked-over lanterns." "Did you report this to the authorities?" "I tried. They said there wasn't enough evidence to investigate." "Thank you, Mr. Carver." Pembroke's cross-examination was brutal. He attacked Henry's credibility, suggesting his grief over his brother had clouded his judgment, implying his testimony was motivated by revenge rather than truth, questioning whether he had any actual proof of Boone's wrongdoing beyond circumstantial evidence. Henry held firm, but by the time he stepped down, he looked 20 years older. The next witness was Clara. She testified about her husband's shop, about the debt that had grown impossibly large, about the way Boone had systematically destroyed their livelihood until they had nothing left. Then came 2 more witnesses, each with similar stories, each one adding another layer to the pattern Preston was building. By the time the defense rested, the jury looked troubled, but troubled didn't mean convinced. Pembroke's closing argument was polished and professional. He hammered on the lack of concrete proof, the reliance on emotional testimony rather than hard evidence, the fact that debt was a normal part of business, and sometimes people lost property because they couldn't pay what they owed. "The defendant wants you to believe that Silas Boone is a villain," Pembroke said. But the only thing she's proven is that business is hard, debt is real, and sometimes people make poor financial decisions. That is not fraud. That is life. And it is certainly not grounds for the campaign of defamation Mrs. Granger waged against my client. The law is clear. She published false statements with malicious intent. She caused measurable harm. And the fact that she wrapped those falsehoods in emotional stories doesn't make them true. Find her guilty, uphold the law, and send a message that you cannot destroy a man's reputation simply because you don't like how business is conducted. He sat down. Preston stood for his closing argument. He didn't rush. He looked at each member of the jury in turn before he spoke. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Pembroke is right about one thing. This case is about the law, but not in the way he described. This case is about what happens when someone uses the law as a weapon, when they twist legal language and manipulate documents to steal from people who can't fight back, when they buy influence and silence opposition through fear. Silas Boone is not a legitimate businessman. He's a predator who has perfected the art of legal theft. And when someone finally stood up and said so, when Evelyn Granger had the courage to expose him, he did exactly what predators do when cornered. He attacked. He filed false charges. He used the system he'd corrupted to punish her for telling the truth. You've heard the testimony. You've seen the pattern. 17 contested land transfers. Multiple witnesses describing identical tactics. Burned businesses. Destroyed livelihoods. Lives ruined. That is not coincidence. That is method. And the only question you need to answer is this. Are you going to let him get away with it? Because if you find Mrs. Granger guilty, that's what you're doing. You're telling every future victim that speaking up is a crime, that truth is whatever the powerful say it is, that justice belongs to whoever can afford to buy it. I don't believe you'll do that. I believe you'll look at the evidence, see it for what it is, and do what's right. Find Evelyn Granger not guilty, and send a message that in this county, the law still means something. Preston sat down. The judge gave instructions to the jury. They filed out to deliberate, and the waiting began. An hour passed, then 2, then 4. Evelyn sat in the hallway outside the courtroom with Wade beside her. Preston paced, occasionally checking his pocket watch, his face revealing nothing. How long do deliberations usually take? Wade asked. Depends. Sometimes minutes, sometimes days. The longer they take, the more it means they're actually considering the evidence. That could be good or bad. That's not helpful. I know. More time passed. The sun moved across the sky. Shadows lengthened. People who'd filled the courtroom earlier began to drift away, though many stayed, talking in low voices, speculating about what was taking so long. Finally, as the light outside began to fade, the bailiff emerged. Juries reached a verdict. Evelyn's heart stopped. Wade took her hand. They filed back into the courtroom. The jury took their seats. The judge entered and took his place at the bench. Has the jury reached a verdict? The judge asked. The foreman stood. He was an older man, a farmer by the look of his weathered hands. We have, Your Honor. What say you? The foreman looked at Evelyn. His expression was unreadable. On the charge of criminal libel, we find the defendant not guilty. The courtroom erupted. Some people cheered, others shouted in protest. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. Evelyn felt Wade's hand tighten around hers, felt Preston's hand on her shoulder, but couldn't quite process what she'd just heard. Not guilty. Order, what? The judge shouted. I will have order in this courtroom. The noise subsided gradually. The judge looked at Evelyn. Mrs. Granger, you are free to go. All charges are dismissed. This court is adjourned. He struck his gavel one final time and left. Evelyn turned to Wade. He was staring at her with an expression she'd never seen before. Relief. Joy. Something like disbelief. We won, he said. We won. They held each other while the courtroom emptied around them, people filing out, some stopping to congratulate them, others leaving in angry silence. Preston gathered his papers, looking satisfied in his quiet way. Well done, he said. Both of you. Thank you, Evelyn said, for everything. I'm just glad we had a jury willing to see past Boone's influence. That doesn't always happen. They walked out of the courthouse together into the evening air. Across the street, Evelyn saw Silas Boone standing beside his horse, watching them. His expression was cold, furious. The mask of civility finally cracked. He mounted his horse and rode away without a word. Evelyn watched him go and felt something settle inside her. Not triumph exactly, just exhaustion and relief. "What happens now?" Wade asked. Preston adjusted his satchel. "Now you go home. Rebuild. Live your lives. Boone's reputation is damaged. People will think twice before doing business with him. He won't disappear entirely. Men like him rarely do. But he'll be more careful, and he'll think twice before coming after you again." "Will he come after us?" Evelyn asked. "Possibly, but probably not soon. He's been publicly humiliated. Right now he's more concerned with damage control than revenge." They thanked Preston again and rode back to Red Hollow as darkness fell. The town was different when they arrived. People emerged from shops and houses to watch them pass. Some waved, some called out congratulations. The fear that had hung over everything for weeks seemed to have lifted slightly, replaced by something that felt almost like hope. They reached the ranch long after dark. Evelyn dismounted and stood for a moment, looking at the house. Their house. Still sagging slightly, still in need of repair. But theirs. Wade came up beside her. "We should celebrate." "How?" "I don't know. We've never had anything to celebrate before." Evelyn laughed, surprised by the sound. "Then I guess we'll figure it out as we go." Good. The weeks that followed were strange in their ordinariness. Wade threw himself into repairing the ranch with an energy Evelyn hadn't seen before. He fixed fences properly instead of patching them, rebuilt sections of the barn, started planning for new cattle in the spring. Evelyn worked on the house and the garden, coaxing life back into soil that had been neglected for too long. The work was hard, physical, exhausting, but it felt good. It felt like building something real. People from town started visiting. Not many at first, and not for long, but they came. Bought produce from Evelyn's garden, asked Wade about livestock, treated them like neighbors instead of outcasts. Henry Carver came by with plans to rebuild his feed store. He said he'd gotten investors, people who'd been watching the trial, and decided it was time to support businesses that weren't afraid to stand up to corruption. Clara came with her husband. They'd decided to stay in the area, to try again. They wanted Wade's advice on starting a small ranch of their own. One by one, the people who'd been afraid were starting to believe it was safe to hope again. 2 months after the trial, Thomas Brennan published a final article. This one wasn't about Boone. It was about the people who'd stood up to him, about Henry and Clara and the others who'd testified, about Evelyn and Wade, about what happens when ordinary people decide they've had enough. The article was picked up by newspapers in neighboring counties, then by papers farther away. Within a few weeks, Silas Boone's name had become synonymous with corruption, and his business empire began to crumble under the weight of public scrutiny. Evelyn heard through the town grapevine that Boone had left the county. Some said he'd gone back east. Others said he'd moved to California. Nobody knew for sure, and nobody cared enough to find out. He was gone. That was what mattered. Winter came early that year, bringing snow that blanketed the ranch in white and forced everyone indoors. Evelyn and Wade spent long evenings by the fire, talking about plans for spring, about what they'd plant and what livestock they'd buy, and all the repairs that still needed doing. One night, Wade asked a question that had clearly been on his mind for a while. "Do you regret it?" Evelyn looked up from the sweater she was mending. "Regret what?" "Marrying me. Coming here. All of this." She set down the mending. "Why would I regret it?" "Because you almost went to prison. Because you nearly lost everything. Because I gave you nothing but trouble from the moment you arrived. You gave me a home, a broken-down ranch, and a fight I couldn't win on my own. And a partnership I didn't know I needed." Evelyn moved to sit beside him. "Before I came here, I was drifting, going from town to town, looking for something I couldn't name, stability maybe, safety. But what I found was better than that. I found purpose. I found someone worth fighting beside. I found out I was stronger than I thought I was." Wade looked at her. "I'm not good with words." "I know, but I need you to understand something." He took her hand. "You saved me. Not just from Boone, from myself, from the life I was living before you walked up to me that day. I was just existing, just surviving. You made me want more than that. We made each other want more. Maybe, but you started it. Evelyn smiled. Then I'm glad I did. They sat together in comfortable silence, the fire crackling, snow falling outside, both of them finally understanding what they'd built together. Ben? Spring arrived with the kind of explosive growth that only happens after a hard winter. The land greened almost overnight. The garden Evelyn had worked so hard to establish burst into life. The repairs Wade had made held strong through the thaw. And in early April, Evelyn discovered she was pregnant. She told Wade one morning over coffee, the words simple and direct. I'm going to have a baby. Wade set down his cup very carefully. He stared at her like she'd just spoken a language he didn't understand. You're sure? I'm sure. He stood up, walked to the window, stood there for a long moment. When he turned back, his eyes were wet. I don't know how to be a father. I don't know how to be a mother. We'll figure it out together. What if I'm no good at it? Then you'll get better, same as everything else. Wade crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she might disappear if he let go. I'm terrified, he said into her hair. So am I. But also, I know. They stood like that for a long time, both of them afraid and hopeful and overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was coming. The pregnancy progressed through summer and into fall. Evelyn's body changed in ways that were fascinating and uncomfortable in equal measure. Wade became protective in a way that was both endearing and occasionally irritating, hovering whenever she did anything more strenuous than walking. I'm pregnant, not made of glass, she told him more than once. I know, but I can't help it. Try. He did try, but the worry never left his eyes. The ranch thrived that year. The cattle Wade had purchased in spring grew fat and healthy. The garden produced more than they could use, and Evelyn started selling vegetables in town. Money was still tight, but it wasn't desperate anymore. They were building something sustainable, something that might actually last. People continued to visit. The house that had once been so isolated became a place where neighbors stopped by to talk, to share news, to help with work when needed. Wade was still quiet, still reserved, but he smiled more, laughed occasionally, started to look like a man who wasn't waiting for the other boot to drop. And Evelyn, who'd arrived with nothing but desperation and determination, found herself building a life she'd never imagined wanting. The baby came in late January during a snowstorm that made getting to town impossible. Wade delivered his daughter with shaking hands and whispered instructions from Evelyn, who managed to remain remarkably calm despite the pain and fear of giving birth without a doctor or midwife present. When the baby finally came, red-faced and screaming, Wade held her with the kind of careful reverence usually reserved for something sacred. She's perfect, he said, his voice breaking. She's loud, Evelyn said, exhausted and relieved and overwhelmed with love for this tiny, furious creature. Wade brought the baby to her, placed the child in her arms with infinite care. What should we name her? He asked. Evelyn looked down at her daughter, who had stopped screaming and was now studying her mother with dark, serious eyes. Clara, she said, after your mother. Wade's face crumpled. He sat on the edge of the bed, one hand on Evelyn's shoulder, the other gently touching his daughter's head. Clara, he repeated. Clara Granger. The early months of parenthood were exhausting in ways neither of them had anticipated. The baby cried constantly, slept erratically, and needed attention every few hours regardless of how tired they were. But watching Wade with his daughter made everything worth it. He was gentle in ways Evelyn had never seen, patient, attentive. He sang to Clara in a low, off-key voice when she cried, walked her around the house at 3 a.m. when nothing else would calm her, changed diapers with the focused determination of a man tackling important work. You're good at this, Evelyn told him one night. I'm terrified every second. You don't look terrified. That's because she's looking at me. Can't let her see I have no idea what I'm doing. Evelyn smiled. She already knows. Babies always know. Then I'm in trouble. But he wasn't in trouble. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. By the time Clara was 6 months old, the ranch had been fully repaired. The house stood straight, the barn was solid, the fences were strong, the land was producing again. Wade stood on the porch one evening, watching the sun set over fields that actually looked like they belonged to someone who cared about them, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not arrogant pride, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing he'd built something good, something that would last, something his daughter would inherit when she was old enough. Evelyn came out to join him, Clara on her hip. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How different this is from 2 years ago." "Better or worse?" "Better. So much better it's hard to remember what it was like before." Evelyn leaned against him. "You know what I think about sometimes?" "What?" "That day I stepped off the stagecoach. How desperate I was. How certain I was that I'd run out of options. And how walking up to you and asking you to marry me was the last roll of the dice. And I'm glad I was desperate enough to be brave." Wade looked at her. "You were always brave. You just didn't know it yet." "Maybe. Or maybe I had to be because the alternative was giving up." Clara made a small noise, and both parents looked down at her. She was chewing on her fist and staring at the sunset with the serious concentration of someone trying to figure out what she was looking at. "You think she'll understand someday?" Wade asked. "What we went through to keep this place?" "Probably not. Kids never really understand their parents' struggles until they have struggles of their own. Then we'll tell her, when she's old enough. We'll tell her how close we came to losing everything, and how we didn't. And how her mother was the stubborn fool who picked a fight with the most dangerous man in the county," Evelyn added, "and won. We won, together." Wade put his arm around her, the three of them standing together on the porch as the sun sank below the horizon and darkness crept across the land. "Popits, the truth about life," Evelyn thought later that night as she rocked Clara to sleep, "was that it rarely gave you what you expected. You made plans and circumstances laughed at them. You tried to control outcomes and discovered control was mostly an illusion. But sometimes, if you were lucky and stubborn and willing to fight for what mattered, you got something better than what you'd planned for." She'd come to Red Hollow looking for stability, for survival, for a practical arrangement that would keep her fed and housed. What she'd found was partnership, purpose, a fight worth having and a person worth fighting beside. She'd discovered that strength wasn't about being fearless. It was about being afraid and doing what needed to be done anyway. She'd learned that the people who changed the world weren't always the loudest or the most powerful. Sometimes they were just ordinary people who decided enough was enough and refused to back down. And she'd learned that home wasn't a place you found. It was something you built, one hard decision at a time, with someone who wouldn't let you fall. Clara stirred in her arms, made a small sound, then settled back into sleep. Evelyn looked down at her daughter and thought about the future, about the woman Clara would become, about the lessons she'd learn and the fights she'd face, and all the ways the world would try to tell her she wasn't strong enough, or brave enough, or good enough. And Evelyn hoped that when those moments came, Clara would remember where she came from, would remember that her mother had walked into the unknown with nothing but determination, that her father had learned to stop running and start fighting, that both of them had faced down a man who'd spent years crushing people and had refused to be crushed. She hoped Clara would understand that sometimes the strongest thing you could do was ask for help. The bravest thing was admitting you were afraid. The smartest thing was knowing when to stand your ground and when to adapt. But most of all, she hoped Clara would know that she was loved. Fiercely, completely, without reservation. That she came from people who'd fought for their right to build a life together. That her very existence was proof that hope and determination and stubborn refusal to give up could win against odds that looked impossible. Wade appeared in the doorway, watching them. "You should sleep," he said quietly. "I'll take her." "I'm fine." "You're exhausted." "So are you." "Then we're both exhausted. Give her here." Evelyn handed Clara over carefully. Wade took his daughter with practiced ease now, cradling her against his chest. "Go to bed," he said. "I've got her." Evelyn stood, kissed them both, and went to the bedroom. She was asleep within minutes, knowing they were safe, knowing tomorrow would bring more work and more challenges, but also knowing they'd face it together. In the next room, Wade rocked his daughter gently and thought about the future, about teaching her to ride, teaching her about the land, teaching her that fear was natural but surrender was optional. He thought about the man he'd been before Evelyn arrived. Isolated, fearful, running from a past that never stopped chasing him. And he thought about the man he'd become, still flawed, still afraid sometimes, but no longer alone, no longer running. He'd learned that survival wasn't the same as living, that the walls you built to protect yourself could become the walls that trapped you, that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was let someone in, and sometimes it was the only thing that saved you. Clara opened her eyes and looked at him with that serious, knowing expression babies sometimes had. "Your mother's the bravest person I've ever met," Wade told her softly. "And you're going to be just like her, strong, smart, stubborn as hell. You're going to be trouble, but the good kind." Clara yawned and closed her eyes again. Wade kept rocking, kept talking, even though she was asleep. "We built this for you, this ranch, this life. We fought for it because we wanted you to have something solid to stand on, a place to come home to, a foundation that won't crumble when things get hard." He looked around the small house, still simple, still rough around the edges, but filled with life now, filled with possibility. "You're going to face hard things," he continued. "Everyone does. But you're going to have something I didn't have for a long time. You're going to know what it feels like to be loved without conditions, to have people who'll stand beside you no matter what, to have a home that's more than just walls and a roof." He thought about Silas Boone, about the fear that man had spread through the county, about all the people he'd broken over the years, and he thought about how it had taken one woman with nothing to lose and everything to gain to stand up and say no. "That's the lesson," Wade said to his sleeping daughter. "That's what your mother taught me, that power isn't permanent, that fear loses its grip when you face it, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they decide to stop accepting what's wrong and start fighting for what's right." He carried Clara to her cradle, laid her down carefully, tucked the blanket around her small form. "You're going to be fine," he whispered. "Better than fine. Because you've got your mother's courage and my stubborn refusal to quit. And you've got this land which we've made strong enough to hold you up when you need it." He stood there for a moment watching her sleep, marveling at how much his life had changed in 2 years. Then he went to bed beside Evelyn, who stirred when he lay down and reached for his hand in her sleep. Outside, the wind moved through the repaired fences and healthy fields. The ranch that had been dying when Evelyn arrived was alive now, thriving, full of promise. And inside, 3 people slept peacefully, safe in the home they'd built together through courage, determination, and the simple decision to stop running and start fighting. The future was uncertain, it always was. There would be more struggles, more challenges, more moments when everything seemed impossible. But they'd face those moments the same way they'd faced everything else, together. And that, in the end, was enough.